Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, this is the 8th episode in our holiday 2021 series that we're doing questions to ask for potential leadership candidates if you are hiring for leadership roles. I know there's a lot of people who are deciding that work isn't for them anymore. The great resignation is upon us, and a lot of people are looking for talent of any kind, regardless of the type of role. But it doesn't mean that you can lose focus on hiring the right people for leadership roles. That's even more important than ever when people are deciding whether or not they're going to stay at a job or not, is who their leader is and what that leader can do for them or how they make them feel when they're at work. So having the right people in these roles is so important. And we're talking about questions to ask to try to hedge your bets a little bit and make sure that you're getting the right people in these leadership roles. And so for this 8th episode, the question that I want to ask is, how do you set priorities when you're managing multiple projects? And I love this question because this goes back to the one of the elements of our culture acronym of lending air support, right? When you're talking about being kind of that shield for your people, first of all, so that when you have all these arrows coming in, you decide what to let fly past you and what you have to block. Because you as a leader, one of the things that is part of your job is to make sure that your people don't feel like they are bombarded by a lot of these different things that could be conflicting with each other. You know, there's different entities within an organization. If you have a broader organization you work for, if you're part of like a system of leadership that has multiple levels, there can be times when you get different things you have to do and they seem to conflict with each other. Have you had a situation like this where you had to kind of say like, wait a minute, you're telling me this and you're telling me this, and clearly it's impossible to do both of them together. So now as a leader, I got to figure out which is more important.
Every day, Chris. Yeah, I think two things for me in this space. One, something that one of my mentors says quite often, which is like, we don't let things fall off the plate, we push them off. Mm-hmm. And the idea of that is that we are intentional with everything that we do and everything that we prioritize. And we don't allow something to kind of tumble down the priority ladder just by random chance. We actually decide what we feel are the priorities. And then I think a second thing that comes to mind is the do, delegate, defer kind of mindset as a leader. Because the reality is this, and we say priority, we say it very loosely and with a very, very broad brush. There's always a lot of priorities, but there's really, in most businesses, in most places, in most organizations, there's really only a few that are really the most important. Maybe it's the top 3 or the top 5. Once you get out of 5, now you're just talking about a bunch of stuff. Like it's
Right.
just really, there are things that you have to do well in, but there are really those top 3 or top 5 things that significantly change your business, whether for the better or for the worst, and that you really have to be on top of. And so I think in the day-to-day work, that's expected when you're in any type of industry where you are, in the people business, whether you're leading people, working with the general public, you're in the creative business where there's a million ways to do something, there's a lot of opinions, a lot of subjectivity, like all those things are going to create spaces where there are always opposing priorities. Then to your point around kind of just businesses in general, you're going to have, one part of the business that's like going for innovation and something new and really go out there and spend money and do crazy stuff. And then you have the other part of the organization that is like, we're in charge of the wallet here and we don't want to spend any money. We want to become more efficient. So I think that's just the nature of the beast in work. And even if you work for yourself or you're an entrepreneur, like you have to do exactly the same thing in your own life, in your own business, and deciding how do you manage through, different priorities that maybe are against one another. But I think it's just a thing that we all have to work through and deal with.
Right. And, I'd like to say in a perfect world, those top 3 or top 5, if you are fortunate enough to work in an organization that understands that you can't have the top 20 priorities, right? That there are 3 or 5 or whatever the most impactful ones are. In a perfect world, they don't contradict each other. That you don't have 2 priorities that are both that are equal, but that kind of fight against each other. And I'll give you a really easy but high level example. We all know the triangle where you have to choose, cost, quality, and time, right? You can give a person any 2 of the 3 that you want. You can have something that is high quality and done quickly, but it's going to be expensive. You can have something that is really inexpensive and really high quality, but it's going to take a long time. Like it's not going to be like the first thing that gets done, you get kind of done over time. You can have something that is done very quickly and that is really inexpensively, but it's also going to be low quality. There's no way to have high quality, low cost, and very quickly done. And a person who says that all three are equal priorities has no idea what they're talking about. So if you work in an organization where the broader leadership structure tends to use language like that to say that, oh, all of these are equally important, then what they're really saying is there's no way to do all of these. Your job is to look at every moment of your day and figure out how you can add to the bucket of each of these to where by the end of the day, one isn't significantly higher or lower than the others. Because you can say that these are all three priorities on an aggregate scale. For the quarter, it is important to make sure that we're looking at cost, quality, and time, right? It's just not possible to do it for an individual moment. And so as a leader, there's this difference between you if you are so black and white as to think that, oh, every single decision I make has to take into account all three of these things, you're already going to have a bad time. It's about making sure that you move one of those behind the other two for this decision, and then the next decision might be moving that same thing to the top in front of the other two. And so that when you can look back at your day, your week, your month, your quarter, that you can say, okay, look, I prioritized all three of these because they're all pretty equal by the time we got to the end of whatever that period is, even though on a given moment, it would look like one was significantly more important than the other two.
Yeah, I can think back to a time like about 10 years ago when I actually got this question in a process.
Oh.
And to kind of bring it back to like listening for an answer, what you talked a little bit about, what I talked a little bit about understanding that there are always priorities, and many times they are kind of going against one another, but that, we're not devaluing one to promote the other, and that we have balance in the approach. And my answer at the time 10 years ago was, of course, like there are situations where an organization wants to track, for every customer walking into a store, how many are buying, and then also say, and then we also want to make sure that we're protecting how much money we're making on products. And then also say that we want to get rid of these old products at a very high discount if you need to. And then so exactly which one do you want me to do? I got somebody walking in. Do you want me to sell it to them at a discount to get rid of it to make sure that a customer is buying? Or do you want me to have a customer walk in and then not buy it because it's too discounted because you don't want to lose the margin of the money that's in the product? And so, I kind of walked through that little bit of a scenario. And I said, but the reality is this, it's a balance of everything. To your point, it's a decision that has to be made in the moment that's probably going to favor one or the other. But longer term, I can't do that behavior every single day. And I have to be careful on this side of things to make sure that I'm protecting, the business and the profitability. And I also have to make sure that customers are getting the proper, experience that's going to provide them an opportunity to make a purchase today. So like it's rotating all of those things over time to have a clear balance, but all of them are important, and they're all three things that I need to keep an eye on as a leader in the business.
Right. So what I want to ask you then is, you clearly know this, and I know this, and as leaders, this is what we do. But sometimes what can happen when you're doing that is it can look inconsistent to your people, who then think, oh, this leader just changes their priorities on a moment-by-moment basis. And so what I want to ask you is, how do you make sure your people don't get the impression that you're just all over the place, that there's something very intentional around the fact that you're moving things around in that priority list, but it doesn't mean that you are kind of changing your priorities on the fly. But first, I want to give it up to word from one of our sponsors. All right, Lorenzo, so how do you make sure your people don't think that you're just kind of all over the place and that you're changing the priorities in the moment to just match what you wanted to do already, but rather there's something actually more strategic at work?
I think you have to teach them and tell them up front. I think your analogy earlier in helping them understand, kind of the idea of the triangle and what does that mean? And they've probably maybe have heard that before, but if not, let's teach them that. But I think always providing that element of the vision and the why of, this is the business that we're in, and these are the decisions that we're going to have to make from time to time. And sometimes it's going to be this way, sometimes it's going to be that way. And we have to keep an eye out for it. And there will be some weeks where, based upon what we're seeing in our outcomes, we'll have to be more of this style or make more of these types of decisions from a business standpoint. And so I think as you bring people along, not just make the decision in a bubble, and honestly tell them up front when you get those opportunities to have either a touch base or an all-team meeting or whatever that might look like, making sure that you're providing perspective especially before you start to make those types of decisions. Like if you see in your business that you've got these, these priorities that are kind of pushing back on one another, start to get really clear with your team on exactly what that is, helping them understand that's a part of the business that we're in. But then also talk about let's talk about some examples here. When would we do this? When would we go more this way? When would we go more that way? And what do we have to do to have balance over time?
Right. I think there's another part that comes to it too, and in terms of what you say to your people, and if you work in an organization where, let's say that you're in a single location, but you're part of a multitude of units that do the exact same thing, it could seem like, because you did a great job of balancing these two competing priorities, and then all of a sudden you get feedback that says, oh, you have to go more heavily to this, and you're thinking, well, you say you want me to balance this. Now what you're saying to me is that you want this to outweigh the other one more heavily. And it can be really easy to interpret that as, you said you wanted these both to be equal, but now it looks like you're going off the deep end on one side. And I think one of the things that I had to remember at one point, and there's this kind of this aha moment that happened in my career, where I sat down and I looked at what the numbers could look like for a single location versus a group of locations together. And just because you did really well at balancing something, it doesn't matter if the rest of the organization didn't, and now you're being asked to go more heavily to one over the other, because what the broader leadership structure is looking at is not your location. They're looking at the entire organization or the entire group of units together. And then they're going to ask you to kind of tweak it a little bit, because they, as a whole, they're not doing well on this one thing. But even though you did amazing at balancing the two, now you're going to have to pick up the slack for some of those other locations. And I think a lot of larger, broader leadership structures don't necessarily do a great job of explaining that that's why this conversation is happening. They just expect you to kind of move the needle because they told you to move the needle. And that's fine. As a leader, you could be expected to do that. But to be able to articulate it to your people as why this is happening a certain way can go a long way to making sure that your people don't feel like that this is just a bunch of whimsical decisions that are happening. There's something broader, there's something more strategic happening as a whole, and they're part of something bigger. It doesn't necessarily mean that they can roll their eyes at, well, that's what it was this week and that's what it is this week. That's just the nature of the business. And if that gets to them, they might be in the wrong business, but it's really hard to say that they're not fit for that kind of business if you as the leader haven't done a great job at explaining to them what is behind these decisions, so they at least go in with their eyes open.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And have a great day.